college football.
College
Let's spell it out.
football.
C-C-O. Good evening and welcome to a special college football edition of the RO Sports Show. I'm Matt Harrelson, alongside with me Russell Parker, our Ross regular. And this is going to be talk about college football, as you can see on the sign right here. But before we get to that, we of course want to say good luck to the Richmond Raiders tonight in their third round playoff game against Myers Park. And, you know, we had a special that's already come up talking about the Raider football game. So, of course, if you haven't seen that, go see it now before the game starts.
Yes.
All the info you need to get. But anything you want to add real quick about the Raiders?
Hey, I think we're going to have a great football game tonight, and I think the Raiders are going to go on to the next round.
Here's hoping. The year ends in 8, so I think that's...
Link up.
There you go. So, college football. We are getting close to the end of the season. I think you could kind of call this the end of the regular season, right?
Yeah, I would say we're kind of in that postseason game. Although there are some other teams out there are playing regular season games still. NC State, ECU are making up games from the Hurricanes, so it'll be interesting. We'll get into that a little bit later on,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think overall this is the postseason now, and we're getting to the conference championship games finally.
Yep.
It's finally here. Rivalry week's gone, championship week's here. Let's do it.
Championship week is here, and that is going to make up our picks for this week. But before we do that, let's go back to last week's picks.
Oh yeah.
And if we take a look
Hoping we
at the
forget that.
total, I do believe you and I are now tied for first.
We are tied at 68 points. Jeremy hanging around 4 points below us at 64. You gained a couple of points there on me. What was that? 2 more points on me this past week.
Look,
So
I've been saying all year long, you jumped out early. Jeremy and I have been trailing you all year. Now, I've made what I say were some suspect picks. You know, I took some that were kind of a gamble. Sometimes it paid off. Most times it did not. But I did tell you like a month ago. Actually, I think I've said it all year long that I was going to catch up to you. And I'll be darned if I didn't do it right here at the end of the season.
well, it really, I really appreciate you visiting the top spot for a little while. But you're gonna have to leave out here sooner or later.
Whatever. So let's take a look at last week's picks. So we started off with Oklahoma and West Virginia. At this point, Oklahoma was coming in at number 6. West Virginia at 13. Now, you and I both took the Sooners. Jeremy took West Virginia, and of course, you and I were correct on that one.
Yeah, like I said last week, West Virginia, I don't really believe in them anymore in terms of getting it done, and they didn't get it done here. Oklahoma is certainly going to go on into the Big 12 championship game after this game here, and I think Oklahoma's going to have a pretty good shot moving forward. I think they're a strong team overall. Not the best, obviously, but they got to work on that defense if they want to get anywhere else, though.
Absolutely. And that's pretty much what I said about this game last week, and what I've said pretty much about every Big 12 game so far this year. Nobody in the league plays defense. They haven't for several years now. Whoever has the ball last and scores usually wins, and that's kind of what we saw in this game. I mean, we were looking at some of the passing leaders for this week, and Will Grier, West Virginia's quarterback, was number 1 in passing yards out of the whole country in a loss, though.
And that's probably not the first time he's done that this year.
Probably not. But, I mean, it just goes to show you West Virginia could have easily won this game, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think the underlying theme for this game was no D, no defense.
Not at all.
Let's move on. Washington versus Washington State, the famous Apple Cup. Of course, this is where I picked up some points because
Yeah, you
Washington
did.
State came in at number 8. Washington was at 16. Washington State was kind of steadily creeping up. You know, those one-loss teams in the CFP rankings, but the Huskies took care of business.
Yeah, I was really banking on Washington State to win that game. I thought they were pretty strong all season long. Washington has been too. I think the state of Washington has some really great teams up there right now, so they should be proud of that. But I think Washington probably obviously the better team of the two because they won. But I think Washington State just had a rough night pretty much for that. It's rivalry week, anything can happen. So
Sure. And you want to talk about really good offenses. Washington State has one of those. Of course, Mike Leach has that air raid offense that he took from Texas Tech up to Washington State. And you got to remember, Washington State was absolutely terrible before Leach got there. They had some good years back when Ryan Leaf was there. I don't know if you know who Ryan Leaf is. Maybe a little too old for you there. But that was 25 years ago. So he's really built that program up. But Washington was the team to pick in the Pac-12 to start this season. Now, of course, they lost to Auburn that first game of the year. And I remember saying, if they lose that game, are they done? I think you said no, and I said yes, but turns out it didn't even matter, really.
No, Auburn obviously had a decent. I actually expected Auburn go undefeated, other than against Alabama and Georgia. But with Washington, I really thought everyone would go on after the Auburn game and just win out and make it to the playoffs. It's probably the third or fourth seed, but not even in talks now.
Yeah. Let's move on to another really, really big game from this past weekend. Michigan and Ohio State picked up another point there because I took the Buckeyes. You and Jeremy both took the Wolverines, and that vaunted Wolverine D gave up 63 points to Dwayne Haskins and the Buckeyes.
I was very surprised how that game went. One-sided, completely. Ohio State just decimated Michigan in that game and definitely put the quote #1 defense up and shut them up. So Ohio State got it done.
And Ohio State, look, we all know that the College Football Playoff Committee loves Ohio State. They love Michigan, but all Michigan had to do was win this game.
Yeah.
And they were in. I mean, it was that simple. They came in at number 4.
And they would have been deserving if they got in.
Now, I will say this. Going to Ohio State and winning is difficult to do. But let's not forget, Ohio State only had one loss. Now, it was a double-digit loss to a Purdue team who had no business playing them like that. Mm-hmm. But still, Ohio State's a really good team, right? I mean, they got a lot of playmakers. Obviously, they can score points.
Yeah, they're a good team. And it's kind of going back a couple of years, past 2 years, where Clemson, they lost a game they should have won. And some of them was embarrassing losses for them. They bounced back and made it to the playoffs, and I believe one of those games, one of those years, actually won the championship during that time. So I think Ohio State is just had a hiccup during that Purdue game, and they're going to move on. And I think they should definitely be in the talks for the playoffs coming up.
Absolutely. Them and a few other teams. I will say this though, we'll get to all that later. But Michigan, they lost one game against Notre Dame, the first game of the season. Mm-hmm. Looking back now, that's not a bad loss.
No,
then you lose to Ohio State. Even though you got whipped, you lost to 2 teams that are now in the top 6. So they obviously have the best 2 losses, if you will. That's why Michigan currently sitting at number 7. But what's to be said about losing earlier in the season and that being your only loss, as opposed to losing later on in the season and that being your only loss?
Well, if you lose early on in the season, you got time to build up and figure out what you did wrong. If you win that rest of the season, it means you improve. You did what you're supposed to do. You learned and you did everything right moving forward. When you get to the later season of the game, if you lose, for one, you don't have any chance to prove that, hey, this was a bad game for us. We're still good. You show that you didn't learn from the other games. That other games like the weaker games, you're supposed to use those type of games to like build up for your rivalry game or your bigger games later on in the season. And for Michigan to not do this when they needed to, this is where they needed to win, and it just didn't happen.
Yep, I mean it's that simple. So let's go to another SEC game here: LSU and Texas A&M.
And that game ain't over with.
I think they finished right before we came on the air. No, I think that game went into like 1:00 in the morning or something. 7 overtimes, count them, 7 overtimes before A&M finally won.
That's a record tie too since I think 2003 when it was a 2 SEC games. I think it was Kentucky and Arkansas, and that game there went 7 overtime. That's happened a couple of times, but that was the most recent one. So. Definitely a once in a while game.
Yeah. Something I want to bring up here. Texas A&M, they won this game. They moved up 3 spots to number 19 in the CFP poll. Now they're 8-4. They've got 4 losses, but they played a tough schedule this year. They played. They just got through playing LSU. They played Clemson earlier this year. They played Alabama. I mean, that was 2 of their losses right there.
Yeah.
LSU, however, is 9-3. They lost this game, albeit it was in 7 overtimes, but they only dropped back to 10th. Mm-hmm. And I know that I was complaining about them losing to Alabama and then only dropping to 7th, but is this a case of, I know I talk about it a lot, but is this a legit case of the SEC bias? Because Florida right above them is also 9-3, and they moved up 2 spots.
I mean, I don't really know if I call it SEC bias. I guess it's because they're always beating up on each other. I guess that's the reason why they stay up so high. I mean, if you look at the rest of the country, I mean, there's not really other teams inside the Big Ten besides Michigan, Ohio State. I think you can add maybe Michigan State in that conversation. I can't really think of anybody else. Penn State. It's about the only four you can really think of there.
It was Wisconsin.
And Wisconsin. Pac-12. There's not really
You
going.
just named half the league, though, Russell.
That was four teams. That was four teams.
That's 5 teams.
Five teams.
Out of the Big Ten that has 12 teams, whatever reason.
So I don't know if it's a bias. I think it's just the fact that they're just
I get
overall better conference.
It's a really good conference, especially on the SEC West side, and we've been seeing that now for several years. Of course, the team we're about to talk about, you're talking about the haves and have-nots in the SEC West even, is Alabama taking on Auburn, and the Iron Bowl went about as how we would expect. Auburn held on to them for a little bit, but Alabama, like they've done all season, just blew them away in the second half.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely a second half team when it gets down to it. I think moving forward, Alabama is just gonna. Oh, okay. No, I won't get that far yet. But Alabama in this Iron Bowl game, it was just it was a great day for Bama Nation, and I gotta say it was a really exciting game to watch all the way through for me.
Well, all three of us took Alabama, as we should have, and we were all correct on that one. By the way, just want to throw out there, all three of us also took LSU to beat A&M. Of course, that's one that could have gone either way. And that was a basketball score. It was like 77 to 74.
I think it was the highest ever between two teams in a football game.
I would absolutely believe it. Alabama, however, could probably score 74 if they wanted to against most teams, don't you think?
They could have done to Auburn, maybe.
They could have done it to a lot of teams. Just think about this before we move on. Alabama, and I gave you a lot of grief about this either last week or week before last, was tied with the Citadel at 10-10 at halftime, and then Alabama ends up scoring 55 points. Now,
Just toying with them.
I know it's 45 points against a subpar Citadel team, but it's like they can just kind of turn it on whenever they want, don't they?
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about our locked in. So I took Clemson over South Carolina. Got that one right. Although I do have to say, South Carolina put up 35 points against a really good Clemson defense. Yeah. And they've got a quarterback by the name of Jake Bentley, who he's only a sophomore.
I'll be bringing him up in there in a little bit.
Absolutely. And he had a really good game, and I'll let you cover that here in a little bit. But I think the future is bright in South Carolina. What do you think?
I think so, too. I think they're finally getting on a track to where they can move on. Jim McElwain is the coach, right?
No, it's Will Muschamp.
Will Muschamp.
Another former Gator coach.
Yeah. So I think Muschamp's got a pretty good program down there right now. I said earlier this season that South Carolina's a pretty mediocre team, but they really could have won this game if they had so many injuries on their defense. And I think they would have definitely made it a lot closer game in the end. I think they just ran out of guys to keep pushing hard in the second half.
And that goes to show you the difference between a program like South Carolina and Clemson, where Clemson can lose 4 or 5 guys and just turn in another, like Alabama, just bring in another 4 or 5 star athlete right behind them and they never really skip a beat.
And a lot of that has to do with them former national champions. South Carolina hasn't really been there, so it's hard for them to make a case to these players that they want to recruit. Say, hey, we can make you a champion in maybe 2 years, something like that. And they're like, yeah, but this team's already proved they can do it for me in 1.
Yeah, and South Carolina fans and alumni and boosters are probably pining for the Lou Holtz days, if you can believe it, because back then, even though it wasn't that long ago, they were winning 9, 10, 11 games every season, and they haven't really done that recently. But I think he's a very intense coach, defensive-oriented. Of course, like I said, he's got a really good quarterback. Now, he's got another playmaker by the name of Deebo Samuels. Don't know if he'll go pro. He very well could, and he'll get drafted. But, again, I think the future's bright down in Columbia. Mm-hmm. For your locked in, you had Florida over Florida State. Am I reading that right?
Yeah.
Right. And that's why we see Florida up at number 9. Florida State, now that their season's over, I don't even know if they're going to a bowl game. They might be. But what's to make of the Seminoles? Because they came in like they were going to be world beaters.
Yeah, they have not had – the past 2 seasons have not been good for the Seminoles. And I don't know if they're going to get out of that limbo next season or not. It all depends on what their coach is going to do moving forward. I'm sure that the university and everyone that's not happy with the way they're going right now – they just went from 2014, I believe, national champions. Yeah. And now here we are, 4 years later, and they're just mediocre. It's insane how quickly that's changed.
It is insane. And I just, it seems like ever since they lost to Alabama at the beginning of last season, they've just been in a tailspin between 2 coaches. You can't just blame it on one coach because this is Willie Taggart's first year. Of course, Jimbo Fisher was there last year. Maybe he already had half a foot or a whole foot out the door.
He was the one that took them to the national championship.
Exactly. Of course, he had Jameis Winston and a lot of other good playmakers, but it's Florida State. They're perennially a football powerhouse and should be able to bring in talent, especially in the state of Florida. And I feel like they're still getting that good talent. I'm just curious, maybe if Taggart is the problem, maybe his system worked in places like Oregon, in South Florida, but maybe not so much at Florida State, even though it doesn't really make any sense to their one Florida school to another. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But do you expect maybe a bounce back next year?
I don't know about next year. I would say give him another year after next.
Wait for Taggart to start getting his guys in there. All right. And then finally for Locked In, Jeremy took the Georgia Bulldogs over Georgia Tech. So we were all three correct in our Locked Ins for this week. Not so much in the upset alert department. So
that's nothing new.
I'll start with mine. I had that same Florida State team upsetting Florida, and I kept thinking, maybe eventually, some point, Florida State's going to show us that they are still Florida State. They didn't. Moving on. Jeremy had Boston College over Syracuse. Syracuse, a really good program, another high-powered offense with Eric Dungy there. Of course, he got hurt, but it didn't seem to matter. BC, though, was ranked a little bit at part of this season, but Syracuse able to win that, so he didn't get his upset alert. Neither did you, unfortunately. Nope. ECU, you had them over Cincinnati, but wasn't meant to be.
I'm pretty sure it was like 68 to something when it was all said and done.
It was not close. And because of that, it actually cost East Carolina's head coach his job.
After 9 wins.
That among other things.
9 wins in 3 seasons, Coach Mo is gone.
Yeah, so Scotty Montgomery, if you haven't heard, has been fired by East Carolina. He went 9-26 in his 3 seasons at East Carolina. That's not going to cut it for any program, though, is it?
No, not at all. It's really embarrassing. And of course, they only have an athletic director right now since they fired Confer back in May. So they'll have to find somebody for that to be able to hire a new head coach.
Yeah, and I'm defensive coordinator David Blackwell is going to coach the Pirates on Saturday against NC State, and we'll get into that here in just a second. But any idea, don't necessarily have to give me a name, but which direction they may try to go in? Maybe a defensive-oriented coach, maybe one of these coaches that has a wide-open offense.
I was going to say, they could very well go after Larry Fedora. He's a free agent now.
That is true, and we'll get to that right now because we also had a bonus for this week talking about taking picks. NC State at UNC, and unfortunately, I picked UNC. Of course, it didn't really matter. It wasn't on our board, but I think you took NC State, and, of course, they were able to win. This was just another scenario where we see UNC score 28 points and lose. That's happened all year long. And just like ECU, UNC now has a new head coach for football. So Fedora got fired.
Yeah.
Enter Mack Brown, Mack to the future. Of course, Mack Brown, the former UNC football coach, was very successful there, but then spurned us and took off and went to Texas. Now, I don't like this move. I want to get your opinion on it, but I don't like bringing in Mack Brown simply because the man's 67 years old. Yes, he's a good coach, or he was a good coach a decade ago. What I wonder is, will he be able to have the stability required to rebuild a program because we went 2-9 this year? And, is he going to be able to relate to, 17, 18, 19-year-olds this day and age?
I think with him being a veteran coach of the college football realm, I think he can bring in experience and his knowledge and wisdom to the players, and he might not even be a permanent solution. He could just be a temporary guy for now. Obviously, like you said, age could be it. Maybe they brought him in thinking it'd be a quick fix to get their program back on track, and then find somebody who's capable of staying around a long term.
But here's my thing. At 2-9, we basically only have one way to go, and that's up.
Mm-hmm.
So why not just, instead of Mack Brown, why not go and find someone who's going to try to be there for the long haul instead of Mack Brown, who, he stays maybe 4 or 5 years and then retires because he'll be in his low 70s at that point. I would just rather us right now, I feel like right now is not the time to go out and find a big name for the program. I think right now is the time to go and find maybe some up-and-comer on a group of 5 team. Similar to like Scott Frost with Nebraska last year, a guy that's on his way up and and you can feel it and see it in his teams, and bring him in and see what he can do recruiting-wise and offense-wise. But maybe. I don't know. I will say this: Mac Brown is adding Greg Robinson and Tim Brewster to his staff. Greg Robinson will be co-defensive coordinator. Tim Brewster and Dre Bly. If you remember Dre Bly, a former Tar Heel, are all going to be on the staff. So he's bringing in a lot of guys that he knows from his days at Texas. Tim Brewster actually coming over from Texas A&M. So, I mean, Texas A&M with Jimbo there, I feel like they're on the back up and up. So, I don't know, maybe these hires will help out. Still, I personally not real big fan of the Mac Brown move.
No, it's like you said, only way to go is up. So we'll see how up we go, or you guys go from there.
We will see. Anyway, so it is championship weekend. I'm not happy about it. So we picked 5 games each week. So we figured there's 5 Power 5 conferences. There's 5 Power 5 championships. Let's just make that our 5 games. So we did that. We're going to start with the first game, which is tonight, the Pac-12 championship between Utah, who's coming in at number 17, against Washington, who is number 11. So who you got?
Well, last week I went against Washington. This week I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go with the Huskies.
Now I'm doing the complete opposite. Last week I took the Huskies. This week I'm taking Utah, mainly because you're taking Washington, and I need to break a point here or there. So that's going to be my choice. Jeremy also taking the Huskies. But Utah has a really good defense. I mean, it's not out of the realm for them to win this game. They're there for a reason. I know that side of the Pac-12 really wishy-washy this year. USC had a crazy year. They weren't very good. UCLA not really able to bounce back. But anyway, so I think the Utes, with that defense, their quarterback and their running back are actually injured, but they've still been able to score 30 points in each of their last 3 games. So there is a chance they can win that one, and hopefully that'll be the tiebreaker for us. Moving on, the Saturday games. The rest of these are going to be tomorrow. But the first one up is the Red River Rivalry.
Part 2.
Part 2 for the Big 12 Championship, talking about the Texas Longhorns and the Oklahoma Sooners. And all 3 of us taking Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma is probably going to get business here done. I mean, Texas has been a great team this year, but Oklahoma's been a lot better.
Now, the first time they played, Texas beat them.
Yeah.
And beat them kind of handily. I mean, it was, I can't remember the exact score, but it wasn't like it was, really close.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a scenario of last team to score wins. Matter of fact, it got Texas all the way up to, I think, 6 in the polls at the time. Now, of course, they've dropped back since then. They're 9-3 overall. But I'm taking Oklahoma, but I know a lot of people, I don't even know what the line is, but I think it's like 13 points or something that Oklahoma's favored. I think this one will be a lot closer than that, but Oklahoma, Kyler Murray behind center, I think there's a chance for Oklahoma to move on and, again, be in the discussion with a couple other teams for that 4th spot in the college football playoff. Moving on to the ACC championship, if you want to call it that. We've got number 2 Clemson coming in to play unranked Pitt in Charlotte, right here in the Tar Heel State. We're all 3 taking the Tigers, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, I give some credit to Pitt. I mean, they have kind of come up since a couple of seasons ago. Last year, they actually beat Miami and kind of knocked them out of the playoffs.
An unbeaten Miami at the time.
Yeah, so, I mean, and Pitt has upset Clemson in the past, I believe.
2 years ago.
You know what? I might go up Pitt on this one.
No, you're not.
No, I'm not. I'm kidding.
You're not. Yeah, no. You know what? Yeah, you take Pitt. You do that.
You want me to?
Yeah, take Pitt.
Of course you want me to. I'm not going to.
No, I know you're not. 'Cause, sorry, Panther fans, but that would be a stupid move because they're going to get their butts whipped. And I know, yes, this not necessarily the same Pitt team, but the Pitt team beat Clemson 2 years ago. Like we
it's
said,
not the same Pitt.
Beat an undefeated Miami team, and they've kind of fallen along since then. But
not only that, Pitt beat them in Pittsburgh, so.
And sorry, but the Tar Heels beat Pitt this year.
That the only win.
That should be a blemish on your record. That should count for 2 losses the way that we played this year. But I mean, look, yes, anything could happen. It could be crazy, but Clemson's defense is too good. Pitt's, I'm sorry, that side of the ACC was just terrible.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let's say Clemson does lose this game. Are they out?
I would. A lot of things would, be up in the air.
That's a really big loss.
It would be a big loss. Now, if they got their butts whipped, then yes. Maybe if they lost by a last-second field goal, perhaps maybe they still have a chance to slide into number 4. Depending on what happens between Alabama, Georgia, and the other games. But I think that's a scenario like we were talking earlier, where a loss at the end of the season could hurt you more than one at the beginning, because at that point they've got nothing else to do to try to make it up. So, personally, yeah, I think they would they might be out of the top 4 if they lost that game.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't
too.
think they will, though. And I don't think anybody does.
Just trying to get some hope out there for some Pitt fans.
Another championship that personally I think is a little lopsided is the Big Ten championship. Ohio State, like we mentioned, coming off that big win against Michigan, taking on Northwestern. Now, at the beginning of the season, everybody thought that it would be Wisconsin in this spot. Wisconsin had a down year this year.
Yeah.
Even though they have one of, if not the best running back in the country in Jonathan Taylor. But Ohio State on all cylinders, so we're all 3 taking them, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Buckeyes. They stepped up and they hammered the best defense in the country last week. I think that's going to have some good motives for them this week going in.
Yeah. Ohio State right now is 6th. Northwestern is 21st. They are 8-4 overall. Matter of fact, I believe they lost their last game because they dropped 2 spots. So I'm assuming they lost coming into this. I do want to say things have changed, but they've played each other before. And Northwestern only lost by 3 points. It was 20-17, which means Northwestern's defense obviously played well because we saw what this same Ohio State team did against Michigan's defense. So if they can hold Ohio State to 20, 24 points in there, I think they got a shot.
Yeah, but I think Ohio State's going to whip them.
I do too. And then finally, perhaps the biggest game of this weekend,
and really the toughest one you can choose from,
and something that you could pretty much call a play-in playoff game.
Yeah.
Number 1 Alabama, number 4 Georgia. Who you got?
I'll be honest with you. Obviously, I'm going to say Alabama on this, but I really have been back and forth debating on this one. Who could really win this? The last 2 meets between these guys has been within 1 point or 1 possession.
Yeah.
Georgia has came up to almost winning, and I think I've already said last season at the end of the season that Georgia's going to win the championship within the next 5 years, but I still got 4 more to go on that, so it's not going to be this year. Alabama, roll tide.
You still have some time to make that one up, and I would imagine in that period of time, the road's going to go through Alabama, isn't it? So
I think it will almost every single time.
More than likely, as long as Saban's there at least.
Yeah.
And then myself and Jeremy, we both have Alabama as well. But this is, like you said, this is probably the easiest one to pick. Maybe you could, or not easiest, the toughest one to pick. Maybe you could make a case for the Utah-Washington game tonight just because they're both, lower numbers or higher numbers, however that works. But, Alabama-Georgia, I mean, like we said, this is kind of a play-in playoff game. Let me ask you this. Let's play some scenarios out here real quick.
All right.
Alabama's number 1. If they lose by 2 touchdowns, do they still get in?
And let's just say that everybody else won.
Yeah.
I think, if anything, they get pushed to number 4. Maybe 5.
So, who would go to 1? Would Georgia jump both Clemson and Notre Dame?
I think Georgia probably would move up. I think they would take over Notre Dame because Notre Dame does not have enough, a conference title.
I'll give you that one.
Clemson, with them winning theirs, they'll be undefeated. They go number 1. So I think it'd be Clemson 1, Georgia 2, Notre Dame 3, and Alabama 4.
All right. See, I just, and that's with them losing by 2 touchdowns. You still think they get in?
I think so, yeah.
They have that much margin for error?
I think so, yeah.
So then, what is this game even being played for? Because, look, if Alabama loses, they still get in. If Georgia loses, they're gone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what can happen that would break people's hearts and make people be like, oh, I can't believe that happened? Nothing. I don't know. I just think I'm fully on board for expanding the playoff, and I think this is one of the reasons why.
With the way Alabama's played all season, they've crushed their opponents pretty much. And going into probably their toughest opponent all season, Georgia, whose only losses to LSU, who Alabama's beaten, and you can go back all the way if you want on that. But I think these two are just absolutely just. It's just, I don't know how to describe it, but basically, Alabama, it's just they're in a different level compared to most of the teams that they play up until this point, and it's just and I feel like they should, if they do lose, and maybe they probably should be on the outside. I just feel like the playoff committee will probably keep them in anyways.
Well, you have to remember that this is a committee. There's no computers involved like we had with the BCS. And at the end of the day, what they're looking for are the 4 best teams. And I think you can make a very valid argument that even if Alabama were to lose by 2 touchdowns, they're still one of the 4 best teams in the country.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. I don't know if you include Georgia. I'm not really sure. That's decisions above my pay grade. But a lot of things could happen. Personally, I'm kind of voting for a little chaos, except for Pitt beating Clemson, because I want the ACC to be represented. And right now, and for what seems like the foreseeable future, it's Clemson or bust for the ACC. So anyway, so let's move forward. Let's look at our locked-ins for this week. So I've got Stanford over Cal. Now, it's kind of slim pickings because, like you said, outside of the Power 5 conference championships, there weren't a whole lot of games to choose from, but we still may do. Jeremy is he's taking Virginia Tech over Marshall. He's got that one locked in. I do want to throw something out there. I was doing some research today. There is this thing called the S&P Plus. It's a computer system. You know how everything's analytics now, but it actually does better than Vegas odds makers, and they have Marshall beating Virginia Tech.
Wow.
Now, obviously, you got to go on the field and do it, but they haven't been wrong on many games this year, so we'll see how that one plays out. But anyway, you've got App State over Louisiana Lafayette. So
yep, they're going to be playing for the Sun Belt Conference, and Appalachian State's got home field advantage on that game. I think they've had a tremendous season already this year.
Absolutely.
They're going to go in there and probably decimate UL.
Probably. Since we have some extra time, because this is the college football special on the RO Sports Show, let me ask you a question that I've asked you earlier, and I want to get your opinion on it again. App State perennially has been a really good football program, even when they were FCS. Remember when they beat Michigan?
Mm-hmm.
Ever since then, they've been on people's radars. Well, then finally they move up to Division I. They're in the Sun Belt. If they continue this type of success where they win 9, 10, 11 games, even in the Sun Belt, do you think maybe there's a day that comes where they end up in the ACC, the SEC, Big Ten, or somewhere else like that, a Power 5?
I think they're definitely on their way to getting to one of those Power 5 schools. They're kind of like, I think between them and UCF, they're probably the best two Group of 5 teams we've got out there right now. And I think Appalachian State is definitely on the way to becoming maybe an addition to the ACC.
Yeah.
I kind of like to see them in the SEC. I think it'd be cool to have a Carolina team in the SEC.
Yeah.
But I think for sure, and they can definitely get there. It's getting really, I think the conference is really too big at this point, so it might be hard for them to get them in there, but I think they have a shot.
See, I disagree. I think that until the day comes where the CFP and the big-time schools just move out of conferences and do their own thing, which has been something talked about. You know, we saw a lot of movement with the Power 5 conferences over the last 5-10 years. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's done. Now, the formula right now is like the SEC. There's what, 16 teams or 14?
I think it's 14.
So 14. They have 14. The ACC has 14. I think you can make a case that the Big 10 and Big 12 would like to add a couple other schools. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in this day and age with travel being like it is, you don't necessarily have to be in a certain region anymore. So I think teams like Central Florida, South Florida, Memphis, ECU, App State, teams like that could eventually end up in a Power 5 conference. And unfortunately, that may be their only shot at trying to play for a national championship, as we're seeing with UCF.
And, you know, maybe there needs to be an even number, like there should be probably, if they ever expand this thing into an 8-team playoff system, maybe that'll happen. But I think they need to have it where those 8 conferences, if there's only 8 conferences, I think they should restructure it to have 8 conference champions play for the playoffs championship. So I think that would be a solution that everybody, I think, could get behind.
I'll do you one better. Let's say we bump it to 8. You take your Power 5 conference winners, so whoever that's going to be, then and you do this each year. Then you take the best Group of 5 team, which right now would be UCF, and then you take 2 at-large teams, which would be, Georgia or whoever it may be, and you play it out where you have Alabama's 1 and whoever is 8, they play each other. UCF, so it would be Alabama, UCF. I mean, then UCF would have an argument to say, all right, now's our chance, we're in it.
Yep.
They'd probably get their butts kicked, but still, they'd have no excuses anymore.
Right.
I think that would be a way to do it. Another scenario that I've heard is that we just completely cut out conference championship games and make this week so there's not added games, because a lot of times that's the excuse they make is, well, we don't want to add more games on these kids.
Or they get bowl season.
Just knock this week's games out and have the first round of that 18 playoff start today, and whoever was in first is your champion.
And honestly, I mean, kind of not wanting them to play more games, but they have a whole month dedicated to a basketball tournament. Those guys are playing almost every single night.
Basketball is a little different. It's obviously less violent. But I just think there's a case to be made for expanding, and obviously expansion would make more money. I'm also personally on board where if you did expand it, like if Alabama played UCF, they would play in Alabama, not play in Arizona in the University of Phoenix Dome or whatever it's called.
Not until the Final Four teams
Yeah,
play.
or just the national championship. You sell that one out to the highest bidder or whatever. Or like you said, the Final Four. Look, FCS does it. Division II does it. Division III does it.
High school does it.
Why can't the upper level of college football go along to that same formula? I don't know. I guess maybe it makes too much sense. And then finally, for our upsets this week, you got ECU taking on the Wolfpack and beating them.
I do. I know with Coach Mo getting fired yesterday, I still think they have a shot at winning this game. NC State lost a lot of players from due to suspensions from last week. We have UNC after the game. Actually, as soon as that game was over with, there was a fight on the field. So I think NC State losing a lot of their players. I think it was 6 or 8 of them that got lost out. So that could very well hurt.
Are they all starters?
That I don't know, but
they're all integral though.
It could play a part later in the game when their starters have no one to back them up to the start of the rest of the game. ECU may have some depth through a chart there they can use. So I'm going to go with ECU on this one.
All right, fair enough. Jeremy is taking Akron over South Carolina. Now, I don't know how much conviction he has on that, or rather he just got his picks in last, so that's what he was stuck with. But I think after South Carolina's showing last week, they're looking for some revenge, and I would imagine Akron may catch the brunt end of that.
Oh, yes.
And then I'm taking Memphis over UCF, and I've had nothing but nice things to say about UCF. I have taken up for them all year long. But McKenzie Milton, their star quarterback, who has accounted for more touchdowns in his career than any other player over that time, got injured last week. And it was pretty gruesome to the fact where they only restored blood flow to his leg earlier this week, which I'm not a doctor, but that sounds like it was an awful, awful injury. Now, they've got a backup quarterback. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name, but that's kind of the point. McKenzie Milton is their star. He is how they, not the only way, but how they generate points. And look, Memphis can put up points too. They've got a really good offense. I think maybe they could give them a shot here and beat UCF.
I think honestly, and going back, you said with Memphis and now UCF, of course, that American Conference is probably the best Group of 5 conference out there right now.
Absolutely, because on top of those two, you got Houston,
USF,
who's really good. You got Southern Florida. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think or you know what, maybe they just say let's make it Power 6.
Yeah.
Maybe you could do that, you know?
They've been, I know the American Athletic Conference, they've been putting that hashtag Power 6 up there.
I mean, why not? And they've had other teams that have been ranked. I mean, ECU's been ranked in the past. Navy has been ranked in the past. Temple has been ranked in the past. So they've got a lot of programs that maybe some have been up and down, but, teams that have gotten ranked.
Now, for that to happen, they all got to get better. They got to win outside their conference, I say.
They do. Maybe they need to start bringing some Power 5 teams in their non-conference schedule.
Yeah.
But, I mean, let's face it. Look at the ACC this year. There's some duds there, you know.
Schedule.
SEC, you got Vanderbilt wasn't very good.
Let's think more ECU versus UNC.
Let's not. And then finally for this week's, actually kind of last week's, who you got for your big man on campus this week?
I've got the South Carolina quarterback, Jake Bentley. Now, of course, they lost their game, but he is the reason why they were able to hold on for the majority of that game. Over 500 yards total. 5 touchdowns, 32 for 50 completions.
Wow, he threw the ball 50 times?
Yeah.
Wow.
And still got more than half of that completed. So Bentley is definitely going places, and certainly was an integral part to that team that night.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, he's only a sophomore, so they've got him for at least one more season, if not 2. And, look, scouts from the NFL are already looking at this kid. He's kind of a gunslinger type player. Not comparing him to Brett Favre necessarily, but the kind of guy that will see us, like a Patrick Mahomes, we'll see that space about this big. The football will fit in there, and he'll try to do it. Now, sometimes he gets it right in there. Sometimes it's an INT. You never really know. But I think with some work, you can see him on Sundays.
Bring it up, he only had 1 interception that night, so he must have been able to get it through there pretty quickly and pretty often.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, look, he's a good player, and that's one of the reasons why I think we can agree, as we said earlier, the Gamecocks potentially on the rise. My big man on campus, I think right now is the Heisman frontrunner. You're going to disagree with me, but Dwayne Haskins, the quarterback from Ohio State, as we've already said a couple of times, coming off that huge win over Michigan, Didn't throw it as many times as Bentley, but he was 20 of 31 for 396 yards, 6 touchdowns. He also had 34 rushing yards on 7 carries. So, he was obviously a big contributor to those 63 points that they put up on Michigan. Haskins as a Heisman, though. You're probably thinking of somebody else, aren't you?
Yeah, I've got someone down in Tuscaloosa on my mind.
Mm-hmm. Tua in Tuscaloosa.
Yep.
Tua Tagovailoa in Tuscaloosa. That's a lot to say. But yeah, I mean, look, it goes to show you how deep Alabama is when you can take a guy like Jalen Hurts, who was an All-American basically, and bench him, and it didn't matter. You got better. Like how many programs can say that?
Yeah, it's insane. I actually seen a video of Tua actually hanging out in the rain by himself in a practice field, practicing for an upcoming game, and that guy is definitely doing it like you wouldn't expect somebody. I think you should expect somebody to go out there and do that, but he just kind of took it to a different level.
It does take dedication.
Yes.
You're talking about guys potentially sticking around. I mean, he's what, a sophomore?
I think so, yeah.
He was a freshman last year. I don't know if he redshirted or not, but
second and 26. And he'll be remembered by it.
Did you know he's got a younger brother, and LSU right now is the front runner to get him?
I've heard that Alabama's been eyeing him as well.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure they take another Tagovailoa.
Yeah.
I can't remember what his first name is, but I mean, you got to face it. Tua's a heck of a ball player.
Yeah.
You think he'll play on Sundays? Alabama quarterbacks don't really have a good history of succeeding in the NFL.
Yeah, I'd say the best one since Tua was AJ McCarron. He hasn't really been doing a whole lot in the NFL, so he had his chance with the Bengals, I believe it was, when he first started out, and he hasn't really done much since.
He did, and then he got traded. I want to say it was the Bills maybe, but I can't remember. But he hasn't really carved out anything. But neither have any other quarterbacks, which, it just goes to show you. We've seen Alabama have just monster skilled players all over the field, and it just seemed like they just had, just kind of an okay quarterback.
It's always been the run game and defense that's held Alabama out.
But I kept saying to myself, this is Alabama. They can go out and get the best quarterback in the world if they want to. Well, they finally did, and now you see. It's not just running. It's not just defense. Now they can put up 60 points passing too. So.
Yeah, it takes the whole team to do it. And, since Lane Kiffin was there as offensive coordinator, we've seen a change in how Alabama has played the game. It's not as much running the ball, and now it's more passing.
Yeah.
Alabama fans like me are not used to seeing that, but I got to say I'm loving it.
Well, I mean, Nick Saban's as good as anybody else where you play who you have. Whatever your personnel
use your weapons
maybe
to your advantage.
Dictates how you run your offense, and we're seeing that. So,
Yep.
I mean, look, obviously Nick Saban, one of, if not the best, potentially of all time. There was still a lot of book
he
left to be written.
surpassed Bear Bryant in a lot of records, another Alabama coach. So
Absolutely.
Alabama knows where to pick them.
So before we go, let's take a look at the college football playoff rankings. So we've got Alabama 1, we've got Clemson 2, we've got Notre Dame 3.
Mm-hmm.
So as we currently sit, nobody's really arguing with that. Right now, Georgia is number 4. So we're all thinking Alabama's going to beat Georgia. So if Georgia loses, they're out, right?
Yeah.
Who moves in?
I'm going to say Ohio State. I think they can make a better case than Oklahoma.
I agree 100%. I think Oklahoma, I feel like they would have to go in and just absolutely decimate Texas and not give up, 40 points in the process.
They got to show that they brought defense today.
Yeah, and I feel like, of course, look, Oklahoma's only loss is to Texas. Ohio State's only loss is to Purdue. So if you're comparing it that way, Ohio State has the weaker of the 2 losses.
But
however, yeah,
Ohio State has beaten the best defense who was sitting in the top 4 for weeks on end.
They have, overall, I think they have better wins than Oklahoma does. And I'm right there with you. I think maybe Ohio State will have to beat Northwestern more than just 3 points to make their case.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, anybody else have a shot at it, do you think?
Other than those guys, if Oklahoma and Ohio State both lose their games, Michigan might see themselves back in it. UCF might see themselves back in it since they got a conference title game. All right,
let's play that game. So let's say Alabama beats Georgia, which we all think is going to happen. Let's say Texas beats Oklahoma for the second time this season. Tough to do, but obviously feasible. Let's say that Northwestern beats Ohio State. What happens then? I mean, is that maybe their one shot to potentially get in?
And they win their conference championship,
Yeah.
and they blow out Memphis. I'd
Yeah.
say that. I think they might.
They'd have to be in the
They
discussion,
might,
right?
yeah. I think they would have to be. I mean, you're not going to put 3-loss LSU or Florida in there or Washington. I don't
No.
think.
And I think at that point, look, Georgia would have 2 losses. Oklahoma would have 2 losses. Ohio State would have 2 losses. Michigan already has 2 losses, and they're done playing.
There's no other 1-loss teams left.
There's not. So, I mean, at that point, yes, Georgia will probably bump back and still be ahead of UCF, which is what I think would actually happen. I think Georgia would still stay in, and we'd have the same top 4 we have now. But, I don't know. Look, a lot of chaos has to happen, and
Yeah.
it could. But I feel like, and I know you said that you feel like UCF is pretty much where they should be, right?
Yeah, I mean, at least as of this week, this is exactly where they should have been. I say for the most part of the season, they should have been around 8th place, right behind all the teams that pretty much played each other and have beaten each other down so much this season now. So I think this is where they deserve to be for the moment.
And just want to throw out a couple other teams here. Kentucky, 9-3 season. They're 15 right
good season
now.
for them.
Great season. So, what do you think about Kentucky? I know they had a really good running back. Is this kind of a one and done season, or do you think they can sustain this?
This could be a one season for now, and maybe because they've done so well, they might be able to get more recruits coming in. So maybe next season kind of a real slump year, and then after that they might continue on.
Also, one other thing I want to count up here. So Alabama makes 1, Georgia makes 2, Florida makes 3, LSU makes 4. You know where I'm going with this.
Oh yeah.
Kentucky makes 5, Mississippi State makes 6, A&M makes 7, and Missouri, now ranked 24th, makes 8. So over half of the SEC is ranked right now.
Only 2 ACCs.
What do you call that if you don't call it SEC bias, man? Are there not better teams than an 8-4 Missouri or an 8-4 A&M or an 8-4 Mississippi State?
Well, I don't see a whole lot of movement with the ACC. There's only 2 of them. It's Clemson. The other one's Syracuse, who was all the way down in 20th. I mean, the Big 12 got a couple of people.
I'm not
in there.
comparing it to the ACC. I am just asking, like, all right, for instance, Fresno State's 10-2. They finally jumped back in at 25. I would have Fresno State above an 8-4 Missouri and a 7-4 Iowa State. That's just my opinion. I think Boise State should be higher. They won 10
definitely.
games. Army is 9-2. I know I'm naming a lot of smaller schools, but still,
I mean,
Utah State 10-2.
Yeah,
and that's
I
the coaches
agree.
poll.
And I agree. I mean, I think Boise State should definitely go out higher. They only lost 2 games, and they're below some 8-4s.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. I think some of these teams they don't get recognized. And I think it's a lot to do with their name, which actually still surprises me because
Of course
Boise
it
State
is.
is a big name. So
Yeah.
I don't understand that either.
Yeah. But anyway, I think Kentucky fans, usually known as a basketball school, I know they're happy to be ranked and finish the season ranked as
Yeah.
well. So they should get a pretty decent bowl to go along with that. So that's going to do it for this week's picks. Of course, as I mentioned, tonight's first game is Washington and who are they playing? Utah. So, of course, that's going to kick off championship week. And we'll come back next week and let everybody know how much I won by. I'm guessing 1 point because that's the difference maker right now. Although, let's bring it up
I was
here.
going to say now, some upsets or some mock-ins could go wrong for some of us.
They could. But I do want to announce that next week, there's only one game being played.
One game.
And that is the, of course, everybody loves the Army-Navy game.
America's game, yep.
So because that's the only game, we decided we're all going to pick, and it's worth 5 points. So nobody's out of this thing yet.
Nope. I mean,
Jeremy-
Jeremy can come back.
Jeremy
He's
can
only
still-
down by 4 right now.
Jeremy could still come back and win. Of course, either one of us could obviously win. So that game's going to be worth a whole 5 points. So it could be the difference maker.
Oh, yeah.
We'll have to come back and see. Of course, good luck to all the teams tonight, tomorrow. And look, college football season almost over, man.
Oh, don't tell me like that.
I know.
I like to say that
I know.
we're getting to the prime of it.
It's one of these, face plant. I'm not ready for it to be over. Although I am ready for bowl season.
You know what I'm ready for?
What's that?
Rare football tonight.
Absolutely. And we will have a big announcement as far as the bowl season coming up soon for the
Oh,
Art
yeah.
of Sports show as well. But yeah, as you said, of course, go Richmond Raiders tonight.
yeah.
Hope they put a whipping on Myers Park, and we'll be talking about that on next week's RO Sports show, which will come to you at 5:30 on Thursday. But for Russell Parker, I am Matt Harrelson, and we'll see you next time.